Welcome to the Intellectual Anarchy podcast. I'm Patrick Sullivan.
And I'm Catherine Cruz, and I'm just a curious cat.
I kind of learned a lot about how everything is fundamentally connected. We like to break it up into these buckets as though it's not. That's really for the convenience of teaching. But in the real world, it's just not like that. So the idea of transdisciplinary thinking is something we do where we take somebody from field A and put them in field B. And
watch them sink or swim.
Well, it's
like figure it out.
They one of two things happen. They learn to learn, and they get that movement, that intuition about how to do things, or they get buried. Basically, one of the two. What we're looking for is people that can learn to find those common things. So it's kind of like
you adapt.
Exactly, but philosophically, everything is really connected. And see, we go to school thinking that, I want to get a good grade in, one thing or the next thing or the next thing, as though that's it. That's not it. That's a beginning point where, in fact, the physics and biology and chemistry and, all these things, the math, they're all connected.
Right.
It's just we're not smart enough yet as humans to see the connection.
All the dots.
And so what we try to do is by putting people in these different situations, if they can learn to do this and get good at it, we can almost give them anything. They get better and better and better because they kind of find that it's like, that's how it's done. But I can say a lot of the things that I learned personally go back to working with a guy like Craven, because I was told, I was in a meeting with National Science Foundation in D.C. with somebody, and I said, so how do you guys feel about Craven, or something like that? It was a conversation about Craven. And he said, well, it's very simple. Some people love him, others are terrified. But there's not much in the middle. And I thought, well, that's interesting. He said, yeah, he doesn't observe traditional boundaries. He finds that there's a connection between thermodynamics and biology. Why not?
You'll figure it out. Yeah.
And so we had done a project. This is an interesting but true story. So thermodynamics is how heat behaves. And it does certain things. It's generally part of science, physics, right, and maybe chemistry, but certainly not biology. So he had this observation, and he said, why is it fruit is sweeter when the ground is cold and the sun is hot? And he said, thermodynamics is driven by what's called delta T, the difference between T1 and T2. And he said he thinks that's driving biologic systems. Now, people in biology think that's a lunacy. So I submitted a proposal to National Science Foundation. It was rejected because they said, not what you do. It's a ridiculous idea. There's no connection. It'll never work. Thank you very much. But later on, I was at a conference on exobiology. So this is non-Earth biology.
Okay.
Like what kind of life might you have on Mars or, Europa around Saturn or something like that. And so I was talking to one of these guys, and I said, so what do you think of this? He said, it's not crazy at all. So we did an experiment. We did this thing at the Big Island where we used the deep ocean water to cool the roots. And you have the hot sun on the Kona side and the cold water. The water comes up at 3 or 4 degrees centigrade. It's really cold. And I think the fruit content was like 300% higher. Now, that was just an experiment, but it kind of demonstrated the idea in this particular environment, with and without the difference in temperature. So he had then launched into this work on, he called it humans as marine mammals. Now, it sounds kind of ridiculous, but he was interested in how you can learn about human physiology from marine mammals and what they do in managing temperature. So he did all these experiments on himself as he got older. One of the things he did was, because I was on a long airplane ride with him, and I sat next to him. He goes, "You never believe what I learned." He's super excited about it. And he says, "Look at the skin," because he was getting older. He said, "Look at the elasticity in the skin. I get up in the morning and I do an ice bath, and then I do this, and then I do that." And he said, "I noticed a measured difference in these features in his physiology."
Huh.
And he had a theory about why that was. So he never stopped experimenting. What I also learned was that another friend of mine, a professional friend, Earl Bakken. So Earl was the founder of Medtronic. Medtronic created sort of today, pacemakers. So the idea that electricity and physiology are connected, at the time it was heresy. You can't do that. It's sacrilegious. There's nothing to do with electricity in humans. And he said, "I think there's a connection." And so he was, as he was telling me, we had him as a speaker once, but I spent a bunch of time with him. Really nice guy. He was ridiculed. He was told to get out of this. He was trying to work in a hospital. They told him to leave because what he was talking about was insanity. Turned out, electrophysiology is a real science. It saved a lot of lives. But he was telling me that there was an experiment he was trying on a dog. This was the story I remember, where he had a homemade pacemaker running on D-sized batteries. And it was on a dog, and there was a child that wasn't going to make through the night, was going to die from a heart problem, which he thought he could use the pacemaker. So they took it off the dog. This is a long time ago. They stuck it in the child, and they duct taped his chest, and the child lived. That was the first use of this thing, and it was based on an idea that came from popular mechanics on a metrodome, an electronic metrodome. So music, timing in music, physiology, human health, you're bringing all these things together to what today is an implantable pacemaker. Nobody questions it.
Right.
That's how these things happen.
But back in the day,
that's how it happens.
Right. So, okay, so you look at these folks, these mentors, I guess, folks that have helped shape you today in your thinking because they dared to think differently about stuff.
Absolutely. And I've learned so much from these people that they dared to try something different. I've had a lot of mentors that were like that. It's interesting. So another story, but in Hawaii, there's Al Yi. Al Yi was an amazing thinker. I remember him telling me he was a structural genius. People thought at the time. I said, "Why'd you do structural engineering?" Because he said, I could see it all in my head, but he wanted to be an electrical engineer, but he said it wasn't as obvious. But he said on the structural side, I can think it and just do the math out of my head. It was just natural. So he did this experiment back in the day when they were building Ala Moana. And he was doing pre-stressed concrete. And they told him it was a stupid idea. And so nobody wanted to listen to him. He went and met with Dillingham from the construction company, talked to all these guys. Nobody wanted to listen to him. So he just started building pre-stressed beams and did some testing. And it was, this remarkable outcome of pre-stressed concrete, which is used everywhere. Ala Moana is built with it. But it was interesting because everybody summarily dismissed him. It doesn't help. It's a waste of time. Nobody ever wants it. That's common when you're doing something really new. And what I try to tell people here is just because people say they don't like it, they don't get it, they don't think it's needed, doesn't mean it isn't. Is it fundamentally sound? And this kind of goes back to this question. It's almost a philosophic question. If you think you've got sound science, you do the math, maybe it's worth trying. That's what these people all have in common. They don't see why you can't. Just because somebody says, if you do electricity in humans, you're likely to burn in hell. You can't do it. When in fact, nobody questions it today. That's how things really happen. So what we try to do here is to give people the chance to step out with the idea that they might get some ridicule, people might push back. It doesn't mean it's a bad idea. And sometimes we got to teach them to pivot and turn to go find the right funding group. That's why we try to match, we call risk appetite. So when DARPA, we think they need something, we'll go talk to them. They're willing to take a big risk on a problem. Risk appetite. Like, here's a crazy idea. I got no ideas. Let's try it.
Yeah.
And we do that. We find agencies that will take a crack on what might be an insane idea, but they absolutely need something, and they're out of ideas.
Right. So you could gamble in this area and win big.
Well, and we're usually asking a fundamental question, like, is there something there? Is there really something there? And when we get that, it's like, okay, I can build on that. And then what you're doing is you're reducing that risk. You're increasing the benefit over time. But what happens is getting people comfortable with themselves and thinking and debating with others and talking about it, but not just because somebody says you can't or because it wasn't offered in a course. You know, if it was offered in a course, it's probably already been done. So by definition, when you're doing disruptive innovation, it probably doesn't exist, not in the form you're thinking. Or maybe the research that's out there might be considered a little fringe. This has happened many a times. We did this project years ago, without getting into the details, but there's one professor in the entire United States who understood the subject. This is with a military group on ocean, deep internal waves, and that kind of thing. We had these theories about what was going on. We collected data. People thought we were totally nuts. This is when the deep ocean water bangs into an island like Hawaii, it's different than when it hits a continent. And we explained why. Some people thought what we were doing was total nuts, but there were a few people that were interested. And then this professor was working on it, and people had dismissed him as a nut job. Turns out, yeah, we did figure something out in the way the oceans mix. And that turned out to be very important for certain defense applications. But I've done this kind of thing a good part of my life now, so I kind of get this, how it works and the rhythm of it. But what we're trying to do is get people to understand that. And it's not for everybody, but for people that are excited and want to try something and kind of see those things that are connected, even though others don't see the connection, we try to give them the opportunity to try it. And I was just telling somebody I don't know if you saw the movie Oppenheimer.
No, I haven't yet.
Oh, it's really it's a nice movie. It's kind of scary, but it's really interesting. And there's a scene there where they do a visualization as they imagine him seeing these nuclear reactions and things in his head. That's kind of what it's like sometimes. You see it in your head, and now you've got to find a way to communicate it, and you got to turn it into an experiment, and you got to turn it into something, because you think, okay, if we can do these things, then I can do all this other stuff. So we try to encourage people to either, if they've got that ability to learn to get better at it, and if they don't have that, but they're comfortable around it, to work with people that do, because you really need a team.
Right. And so that's what you're talking about when you say interdisciplinary versus transdisciplinary.
Right.
Getting folks into a different space.
Right. So interdisciplinary, getting people to understand that biology, physics, chemistry, these things are you can kind of move, but this transdisciplinary thing of doing something totally separate, totally different, but taking what you learn in a field that has nothing to do with another field and doing something.
Right.
And so it's almost cultural too, because you make it safe. You encourage people to try it. You don't ridicule them for trying it, because sometimes they're wrong. It's like a science and technology improv, and they build on those ideas. Whether or not you later dismiss one of those elements is secondary, because what happens is one kind of leads to the next.
Right, you play off each other.
Exactly. Yeah. That's that human connection in innovation. But, back to the transdisciplinary things, you don't stop it and say, but that doesn't work. But they don't do thermodynamics and biology, but they don't. Because I was at a dinner last night with, there's a bunch of folks in town for a big conference with the military on science. And I was telling them, we're doing a lot of work in, it's in biology, but we're applying concepts in engineering to biology, which is not what they do in biology. We were working on this question with DARPA on causality in biology, the math of human health. Like, why is somebody sick? Can we calculate it? Does genetic information, can we read it like a book? Is there a language that we can tease out of it and it can communicate to us? We've been working on this now for several years. But we've got these tools we built, but we're thinking about it more like an engineer, like a Lego kit. So you can design something, you can build it the way you would put up a building. So we're taking concepts in construction and applying them to molecular biology with the intent of building therapies, drugs, for cancer. But we're not biologists. We have biologists. We like biologists. We're not but for some people, the memorizing a thing is not as intuitive as logically connecting things. So the logic of why something happens, the math of why something happens, that's kind of how engineers think. So we're taking the engineering ideas and overlaying it on top of biology.
Like, I was just intrigued to learn that you could trick a mango tree into flowering by putting on a chemical, and then it thinks it's on its last legs, and so it musters up all this energy and provides flowers and more mango, and so I'm like, oh, okay, so you're tricking this thing into providing a sweeter fruit, and so it just,
yep,
you play around with biology.
Well, and it goes for so many fields, right? We're working on this category of things called unobtainium. It's materials that don't exist. In 100 or 1,000 years, there'll be materials we can't even imagine. We're trying to come up with a methodology to produce them today. But it sounds almost crazy, except we're making some progress. Except for the progress, it would be crazy. But yet, that's kind of the ragged edge sometimes we've got to find. It's not that we only do that, because once we get something, we've got to continue to build on it and perfect it, and then to bring it to market, you've got to beat it into, here's exactly how it works and why. Here's how you train people to use it and to build things with it. So there's a lot of work from a discovery of a really cool thing to, I can give a quote and somebody can do an installation or a treatment and you get the result exactly as planned. That's what we're ultimately trying to do. That's why we call mind to market.
So, okay, can you talk about some of these ideas that you've been successful in getting to market?
One that is an interesting example, but it kind of illustrates this whole thing on transdisciplinary thinking, and that is when the pandemic hit, we were trying to figure out how to be useful. And so I told the team, let's go to what we know. And here we've been working for a while on this question of causality in biology, and we'd produced a tool set. So the tool set was what we refer to as the grammar of RNA. So using grammar and linguistics to understand molecular biology and come up with a grammar that says, I can design a molecule for a purpose. That was basically what we produced. So he said, okay, well, if we're so good at this, what can we do? Well, I can either make a vaccine or a test. And at the time, there were no tests, so we thought, okay, maybe we should try the test because the vaccine requires lots of human trial stuff, but a test, that seems to be a lower hanging fruit. So let's try this tool set on the low hanging fruit and see what happens. So we literally applied the tools we developed with human-style AI called anthronoetic artificial intelligence to create the grammar to design a molecule to attach to part of the virus. And we did that. We could synthesize the virus or the molecule with a thing that was like a 3D printer for organonucleotide molecules. So we thought, okay, cool, we've got this thing. It'll attach to the virus, and I can attach the other piece, again, like a Lego kit, to a piece of gold nanoparticle. And when it bunches up on this piece of paper, it tells me I got the virus. And so that became the basis of the test. So with that, we said, let's set up an ability to manufacture that right here, because there is no place in the country or the world, because we just created this whole thing. And so we were trying to get a clean room. And the state, we said to the governor at the time, how about a room? We need 20% relative humidity, and how about whatever. That they weren't quite sure what to do about us. They weren't sure what to think. A lot of indecision. So then we thought, okay, who can we find who's got a clean room? And so we had worked with some folks in South Korea, and we thought, well, maybe we can teach them how we do this. Because we created this whole thing, if we teach them, they have a clean room, because we're building stuff here, but we had a kind of a makeshift space with plastic and duct tape. It looked like a meth lab or something, and it wouldn't stand up to an FDA audit. Right. It really did look kludgy as heck.
Wonky,
but,
yeah.
But, you know, we had these big air blowers, and we're measuring relative humidity, and can we get it to the right spot? And we did all these things. So we found these guys with a clean room, and we thought, okay, we're going to teach you how to do this. And they said, okay, this is great. And then we realized we don't speak Korean. We couldn't travel at the time, and we're trying to figure out how to teach them how to do something they've never done. They just didn't know how to do it. And so we thought, okay, we know we can do this, but what if we look at what are they capable of doing today? Listen to them on what they do now, because they were working on a test for veterinarians. And it was a little sub-niche thing they were doing. So we tried to learn what they could do. And we said, okay, if we can change these things and you can do what you already do, then you can make this thing. So we ended up working with them to make the test because they had a clean room.
Okay.
And it's all worked out pretty well, but the journey started with a human-style AI based on Chomskyan linguistics in mathematics. It didn't start with a test. But we ended up with a test. Now, with the tool set, that's where we talked to the new guy at the Cancer Research Center. We said, okay, let's work on developing about, let's try 12 different therapies to focus on a variety of different cancers. Okay, we're going to try that. So we can build these tools now because we know how to design and manufacture these molecules. They understand the clinical side of testing for cancer. And then there's a group at Queens who's got these really interesting molecules, but they can't get them to the tumors. So we thought, okay, if we do this as a collaboration, so that's kind of how we ended up doing it. But the interesting thing is, it didn't start out by saying we're going to make a test or a therapy. We started out by asking another question about human-style AI, small data ambiguity. What's human intelligence all about? That's how that linguistic thing started.
Okay. Well, I know I just did something with the Cancer Center and how they have this new CAR T-cell therapy that focuses on blood cancers. And, yeah, we can do it here. You don't have to go to the mainland. It's showing promise.
We're hoping to go beyond even that by having Hawaii, for example, be a source of new therapies, original molecules and systems, and creating those from scratch. So looking at a disease, like we've identified liver cancer, kidney cancer, pancreatic cancer, and say, okay, let's look at the molecular makeup of that and the genetic makeup of that, and what can we do to get what we think is a target into the cell, but not carpet bomb the body, but be very, very selective and focused. So we figured if we can do original molecules in Hawaii, now there's a global market, but we're literally inventing them here. The idea is that if we can, instead of trying to be like everybody else, we want to create a tool set to create things from basically from fundamental science, which means then people would come if we can do these because we're going to do it in a way that's not being done by Johns Hopkins and Harvard and
Right.
and the Texas Medical Center and every other place.
Okay. And so how does all this relate to innovation and disruptive innovation?
Well, it's kind of this broader philosophic understanding of education. So education is for the convenience of teaching, but the rest of the world doesn't observe those boundaries. Getting people comfortable with the idea of transdisciplinary thinking is how you really get people to create disruptive innovation. It's kind of a process, but the tools, you need a good, solid education. So I would encourage people, pick a field. Doesn't matter, pick a field. And then learn the fundamentals in that field on critical thinking, and then apply that to these other things. And learning to do that is where you acquire the skill to do disruptive innovation.
Okay, so then you throw them into a situation, they know what they know, how do they take that, apply it, and then discover something else?
Right, but what they got to really do is learn to get comfortable. And the number one thing we're looking for, and the number one thing we would recommend is learning how to think. Not just regurgitate, not just report what everybody wrote, but think. And thinking, not everybody's comfortable with it, but that's the whole idea. So comfortable in thinking about new things in new ways. And that is risky for a lot of people because, again, they don't want to be ridiculed, they don't want to look stupid, they don't want to do those things, but that's really what it takes.
Yeah. But put them in a paper bag and then make them figure out how to get out of it.
Yeah. So we've tried these different exercises with new people, young people in particular. Not that you can't do it with an older person, but young people coming out of grad school that, they're certified smart, but they've been working in their silo. So we get them out of their silo, and if they learn to live outside of that silo and they get really they get comfortable in that, they'll do fine. That's what we're looking for.
Right. So going back to the lab in Korea, find a way.
Yeah, it's not a straight line, but to think about solving something and then finding a way to execute. The thing with the Korean group is all about how do you execute to get it done when everything is a problem. Like a clean room. It sounds ridiculous. It's not a hard problem, but it was a problem. So we had to solve that. Then we had to come up with a way to understand and communicate with people when we didn't even speak the language.
It's almost like you need to get someone with dyslexia and then show them, here, this is where you need to go. And then they figure out a way to get there.
Yeah, and so it's an interesting point. People that are dyslexic are not stupid. Some people think they are, and they're treated like that. It's just their brain is thinking in a different way. And to really do innovation, you need all kinds of people and all kinds of thinkers. So if everybody thinks the same way, of course, innovation is low. When people think differently, innovation is much higher. But some people are uncomfortable if others think differently. So somebody with dyslexia, you can dismiss because they're not like you. They'll say if you're not dyslexic and they are, but it doesn't mean they're stupid. It means their brain is working differently. That's a real asset. So you're looking for those people that are not the same. But see, that also makes people uncomfortable because they want everything to be like in a very specific way, but that's not how it works.
Right, right. I'm thinking of a Korean soap opera that someone turned me on to, The Amazing Attorney Wu, I think it is, but it was somebody on the spectrum. But because they were so focused, you give them law, and then they can think very clearly because it's, it's that's just how they think. That's how they're wired. And in some ways, they just take that path, and that's the argument that they take. And
yeah, and it's being able to see what others miss, because it's not necessarily helpful if you only see what everybody sees. And that's why I mentioned it in Oppenheimer, because they do this scene where he's imagining what's going on in his head, and he's trying to explain it. He's clearly kind of driven by the whole thing, and you could put him in the bucket of saying he's a nut job, or he's brilliant, and that's usually the problem. There's kind of a fine line there between somebody that's brilliant and somebody that's dismissed as crazy.
Yeah. But just being open to how you get to that point, because
Right.
it may not be direct.
Exactly. And what you find is that, this thing that's going on now, it's kind of interesting. Following what's happening in Ukraine, they're forced to innovate because they're out of, as Winston Churchill said, we've run out of money, now it's time to think. Where I think the U.S. has been very resource abundant in the military, and they try to do things in a very traditional way, and it's very hard for them to go faster or to change things, because the peace dividend has them, we always do it this way, everything is always buttoned down. So it's kind of like this dichotomy. So you look at people that aspire as military officers, it's because they did everything right. But if you're going to win a war, you're going to need people that are going to take a risk. Those aren't the people that are going to become officers because they took a risk. So in a fight, you need someone who's going to be different. And yet, if you're in the business of being prepared to go to war and everybody is only doing what they're supposed to in the way it's very traditional, there's nothing different. So they lose the edge. And I think I'm guessing, but there's a realization that that's something that we have to think about as a country, as well as the way we innovate and do things. You see it right now with NIH, National Institutes of Health. Before COVID, they were kind of smug, in my opinion, conservative, like $60, $70 billion a year in revolving budget. There's a program now called ARPA-H, which is about taking big risk, because NIH would never take a risk. But it turns out the mRNA vaccine was really developed originally by DARPA, not by NIH, because it was too risky. But it turned out it was the right tool for the right time in history.
Right. And it got us through COVID.
Absolutely.
Yeah.